First, there was Mail Mole, an adorable 3D platformer where a cartoony mole will stop at nothing to deliver your important letters. Now comes Paperman, Adventure Delivered, an equally adorable 3D platformer where a bunch of mail-related characters save the people's packages from a greedy dragon. That leads me to ask, are all the recent character-driven platformers being programmed by disgruntled postal workers? Or is being a mailman suddenly trendy? I'm not sure we're going to get to the bottom of those questions, but we still have a lot to talk about when I review Paperman, Adventure Delivered by Mindscape. When an evil dragon steals mail and packages from the nearby post office, it's up to Paperman and his team of parcel-related heroes to track down the missing goods and put the thieving dragon in his place. That's the setup to Paperman, Adventure Delivered, a 3D platformer inspired by the genre greats found on the Nintendo 64. It's a game where you'll need to use all 4 members of your team to collect all the scattered letters, packages, envelopes, feathers, and more. It's bright, and it's colorful, and it has a goofy premise. What more could you possibly want? Well, we'll get to that in a moment, but first we need to talk about this unique team of heroes. In true video game fashion, each character has a unique ability that you'll need to exploit to explore every inch of the island. Paperman has a double jump and can teleport using the letters he throws. Carl is a big box that can push heavy objects around. Scrolly is thin and light, allowing you to glide through the air and float up using vents. The final member of the team is Express, a speedy letter that can run across platforms before they crumble under the weight. You'll be constantly switching between these 4 characters in order to solve the puzzles and collect the golden envelopes, which in turn is how you get one step closer to fighting the mail-stealing dragon. The game is actually really good about pointing out the different paths depending on which character you're playing at the time. Sometimes you can travel the same path with multiple heroes, while others are designed for just one. The cool thing is that there are often multiple ways to each part of the level, offering quite a bit of variety when collecting the hundreds of items scattered around the levels. Now, before things turn negative, I do want to point out a few of the things that I really liked about Paperman Adventure Delivered. A good example of this is the level construction, which is mostly really well done. Each of the different locations that you visit are huge and full of off-the-beaten-path spots that you'll need to discover and explore. There are entire enclosed locations on each of the islands, and I really like how everything is connected and you'll need to use all 4 of the characters to solve the puzzles and just to get around. The large, open level designs remind me a lot of the old school 3D platformers, where you'd find something new to do and uncover behind every rock. The game is also really smart about the way that it presents these massive levels. No matter if it's your first time visiting or your 10th, each stage starts with a lengthy flyover of the land, showing you some of the key spots and where you can find a lot of the collectibles. This flyover also illustrates how different the stages are. For example, most of the action in the first stage, Many-Faced Island, involves little more than just simple platforming and collecting everything in sight, while later stages will have lengthy puzzles that you'll need to solve in order to collect all the letters. Simply from a level construction perspective, Paperman gets pretty much everything right. That said, between the gameplay and the camera, it gets pretty much everything else wrong. To put it politely, this game is busted. It is, without question, one of the worst playing 3D platformers that I've ever seen. Between the horribly sloppy gameplay, the imprecise controls, and the laggy feel, it turns even the most basic tasks into a nightmare death trap. I found it almost impossible to judge simple jumps and to even walk in a straight line. And even if you do somehow successfully land on a platform, you might just slip off because every part of this game feels like you're walking on ice. There are literally elevators in this game that you can't ride because the hero will shake so hard that they fall straight through the platform. The gameplay in Paperman is so bad that I honestly thought about foregoing the usual review and just posting a supercut of my 4 characters dying in absurd ways. I have hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of absolutely ridiculous deaths, none of which would have happened in a better platformer. The footage makes me look like I'm drunk or have some major health problem that was going on while playing the game. Yet, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's just a perfect storm of gameplay issues combined with cheap deaths that are almost impossible to avoid. And just to add insult to injury, every death is followed by a lengthy load time. It's just the worst. Now, it's worth mentioning that the gameplay is only made worse by the horrendous camera problems. While most of the game will give you control over the camera, you'll often run into parts of the level where that control is taken away. These are sloppy sections where the camera darts around at a dizzying pace. The rapid back and forth of the camera angles is almost enough to make somebody sick. These are the type of camera problems you expected to see 25 or maybe 30 years ago. Not a modern platformer. It's completely unacceptable. Oh, and did I mention that the camera options are actually busted with no fix in sight? Paperman is the type of game that simply refuses to remember your saved preferences. If you're somebody who prefers an inverted y-axis like me, then you're going to have to change that option every single time you swap out a new character. The game simply refuses to remember. And it's actually worse than that, because you can save your preferences and then immediately go back in and find out that it reverted back to the default. Look, the truth is, Paperman came out quite a few months ago. This is a late review, there's just no getting around that. It's so late, in fact, that I normally would have skipped right over it. However, after playing the game and experiencing all of these gameplay and technical problems, I felt like I actually had to say something. This game has been out for nearly half a year now, and it still refuses to save my camera preferences. It's that old, and I'm still running into game-breaking bugs that force me to restart the game. I expect this type of problem at launch, not half a year later. And that's disappointing, because I genuinely enjoyed the developer's previous game, Hourglass. It, too, had some weird gameplay quirks and probably needed to be patched, but that wasn't a deal breaker. It is when it comes to Paperman Adventure Delivered. While the idea of changing between a bunch of post office related characters is a good one, this game is a nightmare to control and impossible to recommend. Let's all hope that Secret Item Games' next release isn't this busted. When an evil dragon steals all the mail, it's up to 4 cartoony postal workers to spring into action and save everybody's letters. That's a cute premise that should have led to an adorable 3D platformer, similar to the classics that we saw on the Nintendo 64. Unfortunately, the great level designs and silly concept is completely undone by horrendous gameplay and some of the worst camera problems I've seen in decades. Couple that with a lot of game-breaking bugs, control preferences that refuse to save, and a mountain of cheap and unavoidable deaths, and what you have here is one of the worst playing platformers of not just this year, but any year. Hey, thanks for watching my review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. As it turns out, not even Valentine's Day could get me to fall in love with Paperman. We'll see if I have better luck next year. Now, here's the question I have for you. What unrelated job should be turned into a platformer? I mean, here we have a mailman. What other occupation could have you jumping around on floating platforms? Maybe pizza delivery, IRS auditor. I know, game critic. I want a game critic platformer. You know what, I bet there already is one of those. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back later this week with a new episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.